All right. Good morning, everybody. Just before we start, I just want to start with some housekeeping. I've muted your mics, so just so that there's no interference or background noise, and I might be a bit distracted if we have to let a few more people in to the webinar. So just excuse that, please. And with regards to questions, if there's some time at the end, then I'm going to ask that you put your questions in the chat, and then I can answer them that way. If the questions are very personal, then I'm going to invite you to reach out to me personally, and we could have a chat offline, either via Facebook or my website or Instagram. So yes, so you can reach out to me or through any of the groups that I host. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping. And let's just see, how do I change? Here we go. So, all right, I assume that you've joined the webinar today because you either have a picky child or have picky children yourselves, or manage them, because today we are a group of both mothers and coaches and professionals. So yes, picky eaters can be problematic, and they can be quite stressful to manage for both parents and for practitioners. So and why is that? And hopefully you'd be able to relate to some of these problems. Perhaps you have more specific problems of your own, but essentially picky eaters cause an immense amount of worry for parents, naturally, because parents instinctively want the best for their offspring, and when offspring don't eat, then we have this survival stress that is set up, and it's an instinct, I guess. So yes, so picky eaters can really cause a lot of worry for, and maybe even obsession on the part of the parent. Obviously, picky eaters don't have a very diverse food repertoire, and so there's more opportunity for nutritional deficiencies to develop. And with children, you know, they go through a series of growth phases, and if nutrition isn't there and properly timed for these growth phases, then you might find that a child actually develops some stunting in their growth. So that would be obviously another concern for parents and for practitioners, is the missed opportunity to grow and have the nutrition to support and fuel that healthy, normal growth. And the other thing with picky eaters is it can also cause a lot of strife at the dinner table, and difficulty for the person who's shopping and preparing food. So there's a lot of potential for power struggles to develop, and those are often set up just because of misunderstandings and because of parental stress or a stress response. So it's really important to be quite mindful of that, and so we'll talk a little bit more about how to recognize whether there's a power struggle developing and what you can do about it. And yes, from power struggles, one can also develop an unhealthy relationship with food. And for me, your relationship with food is vital, because food is fuel. And yes, it tastes nice, and it's something we do when we socialize, and it has all these other wonderful benefits, but essentially food is fuel. And so that's what I like to break things down to, and the motivation for working with picky eaters is to help them to see that food is fuel, and if you don't get it in, then, you know, for every action there's a reaction. So that's how I like to work with it. So those are the problems that I have experienced personally in my home and with my clients, and just other mothers that I talk to. So let's see what's next. Okay, so it's meant to say goals for parents of picky eaters, and so the goals would be for the child and the, you know, maybe you have a teenager as well, to recognize that food is fuel and potentially medicine. So the goal would also be to encourage the development of a diverse repertoire, food repertoire, because diversity is basically a wide range of healthy inputs that the immune system via the gut is going to be exposed to. And that's what we need in order to cultivate a healthy microbiome or a healthy gut environment. So diversity is key. And even if, you know, we all have our likes and dislikes, so I'm not proposing that everyone has to be able to or like to eat everything. One can also find diversity within limitation. So I know that might sound like a bit of a contradiction, but that is maybe where one has to also be quite flexible in accepting that our picky eaters are also little individuals, and they're not going to be robots, so they're not going to eat everything. So that's not what we want. We don't want to, you know, bring up robots. We want to bring up healthy, happy individuals. So the other thing about healthy, happy individuals and healthy, happy experience at the dinner table is to cultivate an environment where everybody's willing to try something new. So in a stressful environment, people tend to shun anything new or anything foreign or a change. So that is why just cultivating a relaxed environment at mealtime and personally as the caregiver or as the role model can have an immense effect on cultivating this willingness to at least try something new. So those are the goals, and that would be the goals of the webinar and the goals of how I approach a picky eater and what I would hope to achieve. So let's back up a little bit and just explain a little bit to everybody who I am, especially for those who don't know me. So I qualified as a homeopath in the 1990s. So I've been basically in this field of alternative health for 20 years. And I moved to the Netherlands 4.5 years ago, and I took a long sabbatical just to settle myself and settle my family, which, you know, is obviously an ongoing process. And in that time, I rebranded my old practice, which used to be called The Wellness Place, to Wellness Place International. So that's pretty much what I've been doing over the last year. So my background is homeopathy, but I moved into functional medicine when I was looking for solutions for my own health. So I've been an early uptake functional medicine practitioner since 2012. And let me let someone else in. And I'm also a health seeker, so I've had my own health challenges, and I'll share a little bit more about that as we go along and weave my own story into today's webinar as well. And that has driven me to really gather and research and yeah, find solutions for problems that I haven't been able to find through the conventional channels. So that's me, the health seeker. I'm also a writer. I really enjoy storytelling, and especially telling stories about health and how to be healthy and why we should be healthy. An educator, a parent, I forgot to mention right in the beginning that, yes, you know, my role as a mother has really fueled my interest in today's topic. And I'm also a picky eater myself. So I have many layers of interest in this topic. Okay, so why is my child a picky eater? That's probably the question that I'd like to encourage parents to ask. I'd like you to ask why, because sometimes it's not as obvious as it might seem. So ask why. Why is my child this picky eater? And the answers might be surprising. They might also, you might not get a clear answer, and you might get a couple of answers. So I think just start off with some willingness to be open and gather some information about your child. So sometimes it is basically, this pickiness is a personality trait. Sometimes the child is picky about other things too, and you know, you can't change a personality. And I mean, I wouldn't want to change the personality of my child, or you to change the personality of your children. So we have to really try to help them to express all aspects of their personality, because that's healthy, and not sort of something like pickiness, let that override everything else. So think about that. Is it part of my child's personality to be fussy? And then we have this phenomenon of supertasters. So supertasters basically are a population group who you know, have a genetic sensitivity to certain bitter foods, and it's mostly females that are affected, and it's up to 25% of the population that are these so-called supertasters. They have more taste buds, and so they have this greater perception of taste, especially certain tastes like bitter. So yes, maybe your child is a supertaster. I know I'm a supertaster. So, you know, I've discovered that over the years, but I didn't know that when I was little, and I didn't know that, you know, even when I had young children myself. So be open, and you can research it. It's you can Google it and you can see what comes up. So it's not something I've made up. It's something that is scientifically validated. And so yes, supertasters can also hide, use other tastes like excessive salt and sugar. They can add salt and sugar to hide the taste that they don't like and that they find overpowering. And my husband was saying to me the other day, you know, there's nothing I don't like food-wise. And I was like, wow, you know, we are so opposite in that sense, where he says, actually, the only thing I don't like is liver and kidneys, because his mother forced them to eat it at some point when they were little, and that obviously imprinted some huge negative block. But so there we go. We have supertasters, and then we have, I suppose, low tasters. And so when you have a household of, you know, more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 members, everybody is going to probably have their own unique sense of taste, and it's difficult to cater to all of that. But if you come from the perspective that that we're all unique and it's okay, then it can be easier to work with it. Okay, so I'm now talk about tools in a minute as to how we work with supertasters and picky eaters in general. So yes, and kids have food cravings and food aversions, and so, you know, we have to also be flexible to know that children go through stages, and these stages are often as a result of developmental phases. and they're often completely normal. So you might find that a child develops a craving for something which they, don't normally eat, and a few weeks later they don't want to touch it. So, that is also quite normal and to be expected. It can also be that your child is reacting to stress, and stress can be both positive and negative. You can have a lot of excitement, and there can be a lot of happy times, and that can be perceived as stress, as well as what we're going through now internationally, and especially in the Netherlands with lockdown. There's always this reaction, a stress response to our environment and to our community and to what's happening around us, and children pick up on that. So in the same way that environmental stress and family dynamics can also interfere with a healthy relationship with food, or even just that willingness for a child to try something new. If they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling unwell in that moment, then they just might not be willing or open to trying something new. And that is often completely normal. So one just has to kind of have your feelers out as a mother and expect the unexpected, I suppose. And then sometimes your child can have a food allergy that you don't know about. And I saw this very, very personally with my two kids, where at separate times we had allergy tests done, and these were the IgG food hypersensitivity tests. So it's not the allergy test that we check for when your child is having an extreme life-threatening or anaphylactic reaction. So yes, and surprise, surprise, fish came back for my son as positive, and I could never get him to eat fish. He always moves around his plate, and we all know that fish is healthy, full of good fat, so everybody wants their children to eat healthy food. And anyway, so after that, I assumed that his dislike for fish was actually causing an immunological response. And the same thing happened with my daughter with eggs. So, fish and eggs are two healthy foods. You don't assume immediate allergies. They weren't getting signs and symptoms from it. It was just manifesting as, purely a dislike for a certain food. So these are a few of the many reasons why your child can be picky, and you can see a lot of them have nothing to do with food. And so that is what one needs to really, broaden your perspective when it comes to your picky eater, and look more sort of objectively and more holistically to see what could be the driving factors behind their pickiness. So now I'm going to talk to you about something which might seem a bit bizarre. So the canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine is basically a metaphor for it comes from when in England the coal miners used to take into the mine with them when they went mining. They used to take a canary in a cage down into the tunnels, and the canary was there as their early warning signal should they be exposed to methane gas or any toxic gases down in the tunnels. Then the bird would respond first. The bird would stop singing and possibly die, and it would give them time to get out. So the canary in the coal mine is a metaphor that is used in many fields. It's used in politics, it's used in economics, and it's also used in health, especially functional medicine. So functional medicine talks about these vulnerable populations of which I propose picky eaters belong. So picky eaters are a type of canary. And so we have these vulnerable populations that are rightly sensitive or rightly reactive to either things in the environment that are toxic or stresses in the environment. So sometimes, you know, we look at our picky eater and we think that, okay, they're sensitive and the sensitivity is a problem. And this perspective is different in that it doesn't make the picky eater the problem. It actually makes picky eater, the sensitivity of the picky eater, it's basically giving us guiding symptoms and guiding signals of things we need to change or things we need to be more aware about. So yes, a highly sensitive creature, when placed in a toxic environment, it gets sick or it dies first. That is the canary. The canary in the modern coal mine, this is now our picky eater or our vulnerable population that is more prone to chronic illness. This is what they're exposed to in their daily life. This is the modern world. We have screens, we have pharmaceuticals, we have junk food, we have industrial and environmental pollution, we have you know, disturbed sleep. So we have all these problems of modern living, and our children have a nervous system that is still developing and often unable to completely modulate these sensory inputs. So the canary in the modern coal mine is, I would say that the picky eater can be an example of that, but it also extends to many other population groups that suffer from chronic illness, where the solutions are not easily found, or where there's increased sensitivity or heightened sensitivity to certain inputs. So this is an important aspect of my practice, and in fact most of the people that I work with I would consider to be canaries, and in fact I consider myself to be a canary. So anyway, that's an aside. So all right, here's a silly little story about the girl who hated red. So this is me. I think I'm about 8, and I couldn't stand the color red. It was an irrational dislike, intense dislike, and it even was a bit visceral. I just couldn't tolerate the color. And the reason I couldn't tolerate the color red was because I hated tomatoes. And you know, so yeah, it was highly irrational, or so it seemed. And I wouldn't wear red clothing. I wouldn't, you know, as you can see today, I'm a reformed and recovered red wearer, but I still don't like tomatoes. But this is just an example of the methods that I employ in my practice. So the first thing would be to really observe and listen to your child and to what their body is saying. And these intense irrational dislikes with regards to food may have some depth to them. And that is what I discovered with my later research into looking for health solutions. So what is it about tomatoes? We all know that tomatoes are healthy and they have lots of phytonutrients, and so, you know, why shouldn't everyone eat tomatoes? So basically I discovered that tomatoes belong to a family of nightshades, nightshade plants, and of which there are other nightshade vegetables like peppers, aubergines, potatoes, white potatoes, and even tobacco belongs to that family, and some other toxic inedible plants belong to that family. So tomatoes contain, and nightshade vegetables contain high levels of alkaloids, and these alkaloids are bitter tasting. So here I am, that super taster, sensitive to bitter foods and not liking tomatoes. And you know, as a child, I didn't know anything about plant and biochemistry, but as an adult, these are the things that I discovered and learned along the way. So I feel like, you know, if you observe and if you listen, you can actually follow these breadcrumbs, as it were, and discover where they lead and what it means. So I discovered, because in my teens and in my early 20s, I developed a fatigue and pain syndrome, which no one could really help me with. And it took me more than a decade to decode my own health issues. And avoiding nightshades was actually one of the things that really helped. So, you know, what I'm saying is maybe nightshades are great for other people, but for me, my body was telling me right from the age of, you know, the time you can start to choose food and talk and express yourself, was telling me not to eat and not to touch those vegetables. And then my mother reminded me that I also didn't used to like strawberries. So I'd forgotten that, because moving to the Netherlands, I don't think I've eaten so many strawberries in my life since I've moved here, because we just, you know, the Netherlands grows their own strawberries and in huge supplies. But my mother reminded me that when I was a little girl, I also didn't like strawberries. In fact, as a baby, I got a nappy rash or some sort of rash from strawberries. And when I was breastfeeding my daughter, she developed a rash when I ate strawberries. So okay, strawberries are red. What's the connection? Well, maybe there's no connection, and the fact that they're just the same color. Well, there is a connection, and the connection I also only recently discovered when I was writing this story. And it turns out strawberries and tomatoes, certain varieties of strawberries and tomatoes, have an immune cross-reactivity. And so it's quite common for people with a response to strawberries to have a response to tomatoes. So this is kind of a process, a silly little story that, you know, maybe means nothing, but over 40 years, I've come to appreciate that if one listens to one's body, all those silly, picky, all those silly, picky symptoms can mean something. So yes, I now really have very few nightshades in my diet, but I'm not averse to wearing the color red. So I think that's progress. Let's see. So how I work, and I think how I work really stems from my homeopathic training. And the first thing is to really observe. And this is relevant for parents, because if you have a picky eater, the first thing I would like you to do is to observe your child, and to observe your child in a very unprejudiced manner. That can be difficult because we are intimately intimately connected to our children. But the unprejudiced observer is a starting point for gathering information about your picky eater. And if they're verbal, then you can have a discussion about why is it they don't want to eat certain things. If they're not verbal, well then, you know, that discussion will have to wait. So both the observation and the listening takes time and patience, and it takes a bit of effort to put one's own you know, needs and issues and stresses aside for the given time. But essentially that is what I encourage mothers to do as much as possible, and fathers and parents. Basically both parents need to be involved. And then once we've gathered all this information, we need to personalize, because although we all search for that magic bullet, that one-size-fits-all protocol, it often does not exist. And for these canaries, the need for personalization is even so much more important. So the observation, the listening, and the personalization process basically helps me to come to to solutions that help to create health. And so that's just a little bit of background in terms of my thought process and my approach to picky eaters, to solving the picky eater puzzle, or even the health puzzle that this picky eater presents with. So how do we manage our picky eaters? And I already mentioned the observation and the listening, and what the next step is basically to tell stories. So for instance, and it really depends on the age of your child. So if your child is young, you need to keep it simple and put it in their own language that they can understand. And if your child is older, then you need to give it, adapt the story and make it age appropriate. And even for older children and teens, you need to give them facts and show where your facts are coming from. So it's not about me saying you must eat your vegetables because they're healthy for you. It's about, you know, the general health profession recommends eating vegetables because they contain antioxidants, list the names of those antioxidants. So that's where, you know, the story needs to be a true story. So we aren't telling fairy tales, we're telling true stories, but we putting it in language that the child can understand. So one of the stories I like to tell picky eaters to encourage them to try new things and eat vegetables or eat a repertoire of colorful vegetables is a story about rainbow fighters. And I used to tell my kids the story, and I shared the story with many other clients that I worked with who told their children the story. So the story goes is that we have an immune system, and our immune system is like an army. And whenever the army is, whenever the body's invaded and the army needs to fight, it needs to call for backup. So who does the immune system call for backup? The immune system calls all its different fighters. And for older children, you can actually list parts of the immune system and give them their proper scientific names. But for younger children, just focus on that they need to call up their backup, and they need to call up these fighters. And each fighter is a different color. Each fighter is a different color because you have all these bugs that need different colored fighters. So our green fighters get their power when we eat green food, and that would be foods, green leafy vegetables that contain chlorophyll. You don't have to give all that information, but for the older kids, you give more information. And then we might need extra orange fighters, and the orange fighters get their fuel from the orange foods we eat, which contain beta carotene. And then we need fuel for our red fighters, our blue fighters, our brown fighter. You know, you basically have this rainbow army that is fueled by fruits and vegetables, by the plant pigments contained in fruits and vegetables that actually have antioxidant potential. So you can see that my story sounds like a little bit of a fairy tale, but actually I'm using facts. I won't have to one day backtrack and say, sorry, Father Christmas doesn't exist. These fighters don't exist. They actually do exist. They're just called antioxidants, and they have names like chlorophyll and beta carotene. So that's an example of a story that you can tell your child, and this is basically to encourage willingness. We all know children love stories. They're not going to listen to you when you just say, eat this because it's good for you, or eat this because I say so. You know, the impact is not going to be as profound. Then, you know, I just as another example, with storytelling, I had a client. He was a pre-teen who was a budding tennis player, and had chronic sinusitis and was craving all the foods that he was allergic to. And so, you know, how do you get a 11-year-old to give up gluten and dairy? You know, it's very, very difficult until I hit on this idea of using a role model. And so at the time, Novak Djokovic was, I think he'd just become world champion, or he'd just risen to fame, and it was all over the health world that he'd actually gone gluten and dairy free, and that is what he attributed his success, his sporting success, he attributed to his gluten and dairy free diet. So we were able to share that story with him and show him how a role model that he really looked up to was doing this diet, and therefore it was possible for him to do it as well and get the same results. So, you know, older children need more sophisticated storytelling techniques. And then another example is often kids come and say they want to be vegetarian. So the picky eater is often, which happened to me, the picky eater often becomes a vegetarian or wants to become a vegetarian. And a lot of parents who aren't vegetarian themselves might be a little bit anxious about how now the picky eater wants to eat even fewer foods, and cut out meat. So what I recommend there is, if that's what the child wants, then basically one should at least entertain the benefits of a vegetarian diet and use it as an educational, as a teaching piece and a teaching moment. So when a child wants to become vegetarian, you say to them, well, what do vegetarians eat? And what do vegetarians not eat? So most of the time, they know what vegetarians don't eat. They know vegetarians don't eat meat. And obviously you get the different types of vegetarians, the ovo-lacto vegetarians, the pescatarians, so this is how you give the older child information so that they can actually make a more empowered choice. And the big piece about vegetarianism is that you focus on what vegetarians should eat in order to be healthy vegetarians, because that's often where, it's easy to cut things out and then replace with the wrong foods. And so that is an important example, which it might be relevant in your household, or it might be relevant at some point, for you in the future, to expect and be able to supply information and engage in healthy, constructive discussions with your children around food. So we've gone through this process of observing our children, observing their behavior, their likes, their dislikes, listening to what they say about food in a non-judgmental way as much as possible. And we've gathered lots of information, and we start telling stories at mealtime or while we're cooking food together, making kids part of the process, the shopping process, drawing up a shopping list together, planning meals, food prep, getting them chopping vegetables. All of that involvement can also help the picky eater to be more adventurous around food, and also having those discussions about, and telling stories around food can get us to the point where now we need to personalize. We need to make decisions about what to do with the child, and what to do with their food repertoire, and how can we expand it, or is it a problem? Maybe it's not even a problem. So maybe they're getting their nutrients from other sources. They're avoiding certain foods, but they're substituting with other good foods. So we get to a point where we evaluate and we see, is this a problem? And my child is unique, so I need to find a solution that fits them and fits our family. So I generally, with a picky eater, would suggest that you work very gradually to expand their food repertoire. You don't try and do anything rushed or anything overnight that is going to cause stress or anxiety, or even they might just say, sorry, I'm not going to eat now, and then you have a mutiny on your hands. So this needs to be a very well planned and gentle strategy that you implement, like a bit of a stealth sort of a stealth monster. And I do that by just introducing one new thing at a time, and not huge amounts. So you can imagine if you decide, right, today we're going to eat broccoli, and you supply a huge bowl of broccoli, it's just not going to work. They're not going to touch it for the rest of their lives. So I would just say, right, you have one little tree on your plate there, and that's all you have to eat. And I know it probably doesn't taste so nice, but then afterwards we have a treat. And so, for me, in my family, I could always incentivize with dessert. In your family, you might find that you don't like desserts yourself, or your child doesn't like desserts, or, you have to find that incentive that motivates them. It might be a star chart where they get a sticker, and at the end of the week they get, a treat or something that they've been looking forward to. So expanding the repertoire gradually, one small piece of new vegetable at a time, and then incentivizing and praising their willingness to experiment and to be curious and to take chances. And then the other way to personalize, if you see that this child is ill, or you're having signs and symptoms that you suspect are coming from nutritional deficiencies, the other final point in the personalization process is to test. So one needs to test nutritional markers, and they can be anything from the conventional blood tests of vitamin D and your B vitamins and your folate and your iron, to functional tests that are include essential fatty acid profiles, allergy testing, hair mineral analysis for hair mineral status. So there's lots of ways to personalize through testing, and to focus, because often, if your child is a fussy eater, they're going to be fussy with taking a supplement. So if you test and you find that something is deficient, then supplementation is indicated, and then you can motivate it more than, it's a thumb suck and it's an educated guess that maybe you need a little bit more iron, or maybe you need a little bit more of, some other nutrient. So yes, fussy eaters tend to be fussy with food and supplements. So it's not necessarily a given that a supplement will solve the problem. So the nutritional markers can really focus and show us where supplementation is needed, and help you to track so that you know how long you need to supplement for, and when you can stop. So when does one supplement? Because often with picky eaters, mothers throw their hands up in the air and say, I give up. What can I give him, just to make sure we fill in those gaps? And I would say that if the diet is severely restricted, then supplementation is most probably a good idea. If they have recurrent illness, again, supplementation is most probably a good idea. And often, you also want to be a bit more preventative and proactive. So if kids are at school, then there's going to be a lot more microbe exchange. And so, yes, the immune system will be challenged a bit more. And so supplementation can be useful, just given on a preventative basis as well, to prevent illness. Yes, so if we have signs and symptoms of nutritional deficiencies, and if indicated by tests. So those would be the main reasons to supplement. If you want to know more about how to choose a supplement, because it can be a minefield on how to choose a good brand, I've written a blog on it. You can go to my wellness blog on my website. That's www.wellnessplaceint.com, and there's a blog on supplementation. Okay, so the goals for picky eaters, for parents and picky eaters, is to imprint on your children that food is fuel. Food is fuel and food is medicine. You also would like for your child to have as diverse a food repertoire as possible, and that doesn't mean they have to eat everything you do or have to eat everything their brother or sister does, because they are unique as long as they're eating foods from all the different food groups, and as long as they're eating foods of color and all the different color groups. So, you know, that's not necessarily, doesn't sound very scientific, but essentially using color as a guide is also something that is quite useful for parents and for children. And then, yes, we know when we're winning, when there's a willingness to try new foods. They don't have to eat a lot of it. They can decide after trying something they don't like it. You know, that's okay. It's really just about willingness, because if there's a willingness to try once, there's a willingness to try again. And children need frequent exposures to foods that are foreign or new, or maybe you know, an acquired taste. That's where, you know, depending on your culture, depending on what you grew up with, you know, certain foods will be more palatable for your children, and other foods will just, you know, are just too foreign. Okay, so let's see how we're doing for time. So what I suggest is that if there are any questions, that you put them in the chat. I haven't been able to see. Let's see if there's any questions. I can't see. It says one, but I can't see it. Let's have a look. Ah, okay. That's shame. But what I really would invite you to do is to reach out to me personally, and through my website, the booking link will allow you to book for a free 15-minute meet and greet call with me. And in that way, you can ask me your personal question, and I will be able to tell you if I can help you. And you know, we'll be able to meet one another and see if it would be worthwhile to work together. So that would be my recommended recommendation for questions. Otherwise, you can just put them in the chat now if you have some burning question that you need answered immediately. And then for everybody that's attended the webinar, I have a special offer. If you book a first consult with me in the month of January, there's a discount. You can use the coupon code Picky Eaters to get your discount, and that basically would be on a consultation of 1 hour, which is my first consult, deep dive consultation. And that's a special discount for the Picky Eater webinar attendees. So remember that coupon code. I will post it on the event link. So if you miss it or forget it, then you can always just look on the event in the comments, or send me a personal email and I'll remind you. And that's it. So let's see, stop share. So thank you for joining, everybody. I really hope that I've been able to share some information that is valuable and that gives you some extra extra education and knowledge to enhance your own parental toolkit and skill set, because yeah, parenting doesn't come with a handbook. We learn as we go along, and we learn from others that have gone the same road, made the same mistakes, and found their own solutions. So yes, let me be your guide to your wellness place, or your picky eater's wellness place, and reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Otherwise, I'd like to wish everybody a wonderful Wednesday, and yeah, take care, keep warm, and we'll get through this lockdown together. Bye, everybody.